How goes the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran on day 3 of the bombing that began on Saturday morning? How long does President Trump have to continue his campaign before his domestic support starts to decline? And what do we know about what is happening inside Iran after the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Those are just a few of the many questions that are swirling about in the wake of the president's momentous decision to join Israel in a campaign against the Iranian regime. Lots to talk about here. I'm Paul Gigot on Potomac Watch. So last week, I talked with Elliot Kaufman, who's with me again. The question we asked then, Elliot, was, will the president go to war? We've had our answer. Elliot, of course, has tracked events in the Middle East for years. So let's listen first to the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, at the Pentagon here on Monday morning about the run-up to the decision to bomb.
Well, President Trump, Secretary Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, they bent over backwards for real diplomacy, offering pathway after pathway to peace. I watched it. I was there. They tried over and over and over again, earnest attempts at peace. The former regime had every chance to make a peaceful and sensible deal. But Tehran was not negotiating. They were stalling, buying time to reload their missile stockpiles and restart their nuclear ambitions. Their goal, hold us hostage, threatening to strike our forces.
You know, Elliot, this is one of the puzzles here about this whole recent episode. You had the strike in June, which the Iranian regime, this was the Israel-U.S. bombing Operation Midnight Hammer, which did so much damage to its nuclear program. You would think that the regime would have understood that Donald Trump is not Barack Obama. Donald Trump is not Joe Biden. That there was a real risk that he would, in fact, use force if they couldn't come to a deal. And Trump was offering, I think from their lights, a pretty good deal. They could have continued even to have some enrichment of uranium, which I think is a terrible idea. But they could have gotten something out of it, but they refused to compromise even on that amount. They refused to even discuss missiles and their missile supply and production. And they refused to talk about the outward projection of their force-free proxies. How do you explain it? The failure to strike a deal like that?
It's a great question. They may have thought that the 12-day war in June was as bad as it could get. Because remember, even that a year ago, 2 years ago, would have seemed almost unthinkable.
Sure.
That you could have Israeli aerial supremacy over Iran, striking targets at will, and then America not only allowing that, but joining in for one single mission, taking out Iran's major nuclear facilities. It may have thought, okay, President Trump has an appetite for that, for the one mission, and it can hit us and it can humiliate us, but it can't defeat us truly. We will survive, and that is our biggest advantage. Mm-hmm. I think that's how the regime saw it.
You don't think it was perhaps with Ali Khamenei something of a martyr complex at 86 years old, that he was willing to die and become a martyr in the eyes of the Iranian people?
There could well be. I don't think there was ever a scenario of him fleeing to Moscow,
right,
for instance. But at the same time, President Trump was asking for a lot, and he may have thought that consenting to a deal like that, without receiving major sanctions relief in return, that could be even more dangerous to his regime's survival, if not his personal survival, than risking war. And I think the verdict is still out on that one. We'll see how it goes.
Well, we know the verdict on his going the other way.
On his personal survival.
He has gone to meet his colleagues up in the afterlife. Let's listen to President Trump on Sunday talk about the war and the casualties.
Earlier today, CENTCOM shared the news that 3 U.S. military service members have been killed in action. As one nation, we grieve for the true American patriots who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our nation, even as we continue the righteous mission for which they gave their lives. We pray for the full recovery of the wounded and send our immense love and eternal gratitude to the families of the fallen. And sadly, there will likely be more. Before it ends, that's the way it is. Likely be more, but we'll do everything possible where that won't be the case. But America will avenge their deaths and deliver the most punishing blow to the terrorists who have waged war against basically civilization.
So since the president talked there has been a 4th American killed, apparently in the same strike of retaliation by the Iranians. He had been wounded and has since died. And there were 5 total who'd been wounded on Sunday, as of Sunday, but one of those has now died. So that's terrible news. But I think the president is has been wise to set the stage for something like that happening. Wars are awful. They're not antiseptic, and you can't sell them as a president as if they are, because people understand the sacrifices that are being made. So I think the president's right on that front. But let's talk about his war aims here, because he laid them out on the weekend. Number one, further damage the nuclear program so it can't get up and running. Eradicate or diminish at least the missile program the country has, not just the stockpiles, but the launchers and the production system. And that's been a major target of the bombing campaign. And then also destroy the Navy. The president said Sunday that 9 ships had already been sunk and they were going for more. He said, we're going to get the rest of them. And that's important because that poses a risk to the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and all kinds of commercial traffic, and to the American Navy. But the big one is regime change. And the president has put that on the table candidly. He basically has put the onus on the Iranian people, said, you're going to have to do it. We're not going to do it for you, but we're going to help. What kind of progress have we been making here on those war aims?
Well, I think it started on day one when really each side laid down its marker. So on day one, Israeli jets took out not only the Ayatollah, as we mentioned, but also 40 senior Iranian regime officials and military commanders. So that right there sends the regime into a major dislocation. It's not regime change, as you might put it, but the regime will have to adapt itself, find new leadership, make something work. That was established right off the bat. By the start of day 2, America and Israel had established air superiority in Iran, and we saw Israeli jets broadening their mission to really strike all kinds of Iranian internal security targets.
These are the headquarters and barracks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as well as the Besiege, who are the domestic paramilitary enforcers.
Exactly right. And other targets too. And they've had success with this. But the question is, what does that lead to? So right now, the bases are rubble. Accordingly, Besiege paramilitaries are out in the streets.
They're dispersing.
Where they can actually be effective in the streets, arresting any sort of protesters. So this is not an easy task. It's going to take more. Crucial initial steps have been taken, but it'll take Israeli air power, American air power, a lot more chaos, I think, before Iranians can do what President Trump called on, which is, he said, after our bombing is done, come out once more in the streets and take back your country.
All right. So that regime change box is one war aim here. You also have these the other aims, which are take out the nuclear program, what has been left of it after the June bombing, and the missile program and its production capacity, plants and equipment, and supplies and launchers. That seems to be going in systematic fashion and fairly effective. And then the Navy as well seems to be well along. Still some time to go. Iran retains the ability clearly to fire drones and missiles at its neighbors, as they have been doing, and at American bases in the region. But if this continues and we'll talk about this, the president sent mixed signals about how long it's going to continue. If this continues long enough, it seems that their military is going to be substantially degraded, if not, 80, 90%.
Yeah. And it's true along each of those vectors. A senior Israeli official confirmed to me his country's assessment that around half of Iran's missile launchers have been taken out already. And really,
this is just day 3.
Right. And American planes have been hitting larger military targets. B-2s were sent in to strike at Iran's underground missile cities. So those are not just missile launchers, but also the stockpiles themselves. We don't know how effective this has all been, but it seems that with every passing hour, Iran will lose some more capability to respond against Americans, against Israel, and against Arab states in the region.
Those war aims are achievable with enough bombing. I think can't get everything, obviously, but you can really do substantial damage here. The regime change question is so much more difficult because whatever you say, what have you mentioned, the elements of control, the besieged, the cops, the RGC, they seem to be holding fast so far. Now, this is the big question. Are we going to see breaks inside the regime where people say to the hardest of hardliners, including Ali Khamenei, who is the right-hand man of Khamenei and is still a big player, maybe the biggest player there now. But will there be voices substantial enough and influential enough to stand up and say, this is not working for us. We are getting really, really hurt. We should try a different tack if we want to survive as a regime. Now, the response to that from those forces would be, we start to talk like that and we will lose, because then the public will get the sense that we can be had. On the other hand, the president of the United States doesn't want to continue this forever. Clearly, he's now saying on Monday, he said, as we speak, it's going to last 4 or 5 weeks, the bombing, but I'll last whatever it takes. And then whatever it takes to do what? To have the regime fall? Well, I think that's the thing that is imponderable. We don't know whether that'll happen, but as much as we'd like to see a revolt in the streets that ends up with a democratic Iran. Another likelihood, and I would argue maybe more likely, is that there are regime elements who say, to survive, we've got to try a different strategy here and try to cut a deal with Trump to be able to stop the attacks. What do you think?
I think that's right. They will end up looking to regime elements. If they would have their way, it would be regime remnants.
Right.
But President Trump says, a Venezuela type situation would be ideal. And I think what he means by that is if there were someone that he could talk to and try to accomplish his aims that way, he might take it. And so we'll see, is there an Iranian figure who will try to present himself in that way? And then there will have to be a determination made. Are we being played by someone who,
right,
just wants to end the war? Yeah, we can talk about it. But do they really mean it? Are they going to continue the same old policies? I think it remains true, though, that those same old policies are what led Iran to catastrophe. Military, yes, but also economic, and also with its own people, where it really had no answer to them but to massacre them in the streets. So those same old policies haven't worked. There is every reason, I think, to turn away from them.
All right. Let's talk about the risks to President Trump and the United States here with this intervention. They are not small. For example, there's the casualties, American casualties. But let's listen to Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on Monday, warning the rest of the world against taking advantage of America's focus on Iran at the moment.
As major combat operations continue across CENTCOM, we remain engaged globally. America's joint force retains the credibility, capacity, and flexibility to respond to any contingency anywhere in the world at any time. To those who would test our resolve or threaten the United States, our allies, or our interests, understand clearly we can reach you, we can sustain the fight, and we can scale the fight, and we will prevail.
That is a very interesting statement, Elliot, because I think what he is doing is he's addressing the concern that we've seen in the press pop up that the U.S. is running out of ammunition. It's running out of missiles. It's running out of the ability to sustain even this attack in the Middle East. President's been reassuring everybody that that's not the case. And Kane is basically telling Russia and China here, and maybe North Korea and anyone else who wants to take advantage, don't do it, because we still have the capacity to be able to stop you and punish you for that. There is a problem of stockpiles, American stockpiles, though. So that's one risk here for the United States. Another one, this could end up, if it ends up in a regional war that is ongoing, that has no end for many months. That could lead to instability and trouble. You have a possibility of refugees flowing out of the region into Europe and elsewhere that would create instability. Oil and gas supplies could be stopped for many weeks or months. And then you could have the possibility of a civil war in Iran, I guess, if that again leads to refugee outflows and instability for months. I'm kind of I'm not predicting any of this. I'm just laying out a parade of horribles just so our listeners understand that war is not risk-free, and there are some ways this could go wrong. How do you assess that list of risks?
Well, I think on day one, Iran established two of them. So the first we mentioned is U.S. casualties, 3, and now it turned into 4. So it has made that a political pressure point. It knows it's not going to defeat the U.S. Military, but it can impose political pressure on the president. And that's one big way. Also, on the first day, it regionalized the war. Instead of focusing its fire on Israel, let's say, or purely on U.S. Forces, it's fired all across the region. In fact, firing on the UAE more than anyone.
Which is Dubai.
That's right.
Yeah.
And civilian targets there, terrorizing them, really. It's fired on its own partners, Qatar, Oman, hitting gas facilities, oil refinery in Saudi Arabia on this third day, those latter two. So it has made very clear how it intends to win, imposing regional pressure and U.S. casualty pressure. The question is, does that amount to enough to force President Trump to change the way he thinks about this war, shift his aims, shift what he will settle for?
Mm-hmm.
He could react to that same regional pressure by saying, well, now we know that this Iranian regime really can't survive. We can't live with it. We can't welcome it back to the neighborhood anymore. And UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, they could all agree with that, newly agree with that
In other
assessment.
words, Iran may be creating a regional coalition that didn't exist before against its survival.
Exactly right. And so this is a very high risk strategy right now. I would say on the question of oil and gas, Iran is raising prices for Europe, Americans too, but most of that oil from the region goes to its own partner, China. And so it is likely to face pressure on that front from the Chinese. And so what I'm saying is none of these moves by the Iranian regime are cost-free, are risk-free. All of them
for the regime.
can backfire for the regime.
Yeah, China cannot be happy with closing the Strait of Hormuz. Interesting, I mean, China in particular is a user of liquefied natural gas from Qatar, while Europe and others rely much more on American LNG, which of course has ramped up in spectacular fashion over the last decade, and now is the kind of supply of global natural gas that can offset some of the supply disruptions that this war is going to cause. So China will have an incentive to try to stop this on the early side. All of these other risks, I mean, I think the long-term, the predictions over the coming weeks and months of the turmoil that might take place in Iran is very, very hard to game out. Multiple ethnic groups, multiple potential power centers. So we really don't know how it will go. But if you step back, Elliot, let's say that in a year, or 6 months, there is no regime change. The regime is still hunkering down, but it's surviving. It has been able to kill protesters and put down any challenge to its rule, but it is increasingly isolated. Sanctions are still on, and its military has been all but destroyed. Is that the sort of thing that the President Trump could say, look, we achieved our war aims for the most part. It's too bad that the regime still exists, but we're going to keep putting pressure on them, and we'll see what happens. And that emerges as a real victory for the president.
And he might still have that regional coalition behind him on that to further isolate Iran's regime. I think, yes, he could say, as in most wars, we don't achieve every single objective, but there are limited but still important objectives that America and Israel are well on their way to achieving. And I think with further days and further weeks of strikes, we will only see more of that. And he could hang his hat on a strategic victory in the region, changing the balance of power in the region without having devoted American ground forces, without having been trapped in a long, expensive, and deadly war. He could certainly call that a success. And I think Americans, if they look at it, would be rather happy with that outcome. I think it would also be an honorable outcome for the president, who of course promised Iranian protesters the regime will pay a price for this. Mm-hmm. Well, the Ayatollah has paid a price for it, and the rest of the regime as well.
Yeah, and we talked about the potential risks of on the downside, but on the upside, if that kind of scenario plays out that we were talking about, then you could see the Saudis and the Israelis, for example, advancing the Abraham Accords. You could see a very different kind of coalition form in the Middle East. Not to say there are not some wild cards there. Turkey in particular is one, and that's a discussion for another day. Interesting that it's the one country so far, I think, that Iran hasn't struck.
That's right.
But in retaliation. But despite the presence of American bases in Sirleck, the big one, NATO base, the upside is considerable. And one more broad point before we close: the reestablishment of American deterrence and its credibility. When you think about Midnight Hammer in June, when you think about Venezuela, and I have my issues with what the president's doing in Venezuela, but you can't argue with the fact that Maduro is no longer there. And the president followed through on that. And then you see this going after the Iranian regime, as he promised, enforcing his red lines, unlike Obama and Biden. That's a message that of deterrence to an American credibility, and says we will back up what we say, what our red lines are, and we will back up our promises and commitments. That potentially is a big step forward for peace.
And I would say I'm not ready yet to settle for the limited gains, the limited objectives, but to critics who are asking fairly, what's the end game?
What's the end game? Yeah.
The answer is we don't quite know. Probably we can't know, but there are respectable fallback options. And I think that is important for people out there and politicians out there to understand.
That is, even if you have an Iranian regime with its remnants that survives, it is much, much diminished. And its ability to feed its proxies, gone. Its ability to field the Navy, gone. Its ability to have missiles that threaten its neighbors, gone. Its nuclear program, gone. Those are all significant achievements because this regime has demonstrated over 47 years that it wants to kill Americans, has killed Americans, and has wanted to dominate the region. And that would be an enormous setback to that project. All right. Thank you, Elliot Kaufman. Thank you all for listening. We are here every day on Potomac Watch, and of course, we will follow the war in the Middle East as it unfolds on a day-to-day fashion here, momentous events unfolding here in the second Trump term. Thanks for listening.